Blessings, good evening to you all. It's Tuesday night, so means we have a few questions to answer, which may be of benefit to you, hopefully. The first one is, can you talk about the life and practice of Luang Prom? So Luang Prom, probably only a very small number of people listening will have heard of him, I would have thought. Luang, as I've mentioned before, means venerable grandfather, so it's a term of respect and affection that Thais will give to, particularly to forest monks when they become older, but generally all monks when they get older. Prom was his name, and Luang Prom was one of the first students of Luang Man from the very early years, and he's well known because he was believed to be an arahant, enlightened student of Luang Man. He was born in Sakonnakhon province, which is northeast Thailand, like so many of these other well-known enlightened meditation masters, born in northeast Thailand in the late 1800s, so a long time ago now. So he was a little bit younger than Luang Man, his teacher, but still a long time ago now. He died about 1970, I believe, or 1969, 70, so before I went to Thailand. But he had a long life. He was about 80-something when he died. And one of the special things about his life that people remember is the way he became a monk and sort of how he did it. He didn't become a monk until he was about 37 years old, so he actually lived a reasonable while in the world before becoming a monk. And he said his worldview was, when he was growing up, was that true happiness is getting a job or finding a way to earn money, building up your wealth, building a home, getting married, having kids. That's happiness. And he said he was really fixed on that goal. And he, like many of these enlightened masters, he was a very hard worker, diligent person as a lay person. Many great meditation masters have done quite a lot before they become monks. They've studied, they've worked, they've done different things. He was no exception. So he worked very hard. He was born into a farming community, but he learned to trade. So he became a merchant in his younger years. Growing up, he learned to trade, and particularly trade in cattle. And in those days, so this is like 1910 maybe, he would trade between towns and cities. He lived in the countryside, but he would trade. And in those days, you traded by going by ox cart. And you take your cattle with you and sell them at auction, perhaps, or other agricultural goods, but particularly cattle. So he became very good at that and built up a lot of wealth by trading in cattle, but it was a hard life because he had to take his ox cart for long journeys, which were dangerous because in those days Thailand was mostly jungle, and if you're taking cattle along jungle paths, there's a lot of chance that you'll get attacked by tigers or thieves. There were a lot of thieves around. So he had to be a very capable man as he grew up. He had to be strong, intelligent, and even be ready to defend himself, which he had to, so he carried weapons. But he was successful, so he built up a very good business and became the richest man in his village. So he was sought after by the ladies, so he married, found himself a wife, and built his first home where he kept his stock. They say he had hundreds and hundreds of cattle and oxen and buffalo and a lot of other equipment, tools and so on, which he traded. And he was so successful and respected for that he was invited to be the village headman, which is like, in rural Thailand in those days, the village headman is like everything. He's the policeman, the judge, the justice, the administrator, the representative of the government, the organizer, sometimes even the doctor. He would have to do everything because he was an intelligent, respected, hard-working man. People trusted him. And they said before he was a monk, he already had this great sense of justice. He tried to be fair to everyone, listen to everyone, and never act out of anger or prejudice in the way he did his business or managed the affairs of his village. But a turning point in his life, in his early 30s, his wife got pregnant, and he was so happy. He's going to have his first child. And then unfortunately she died in giving birth. She gave birth to a son, but the son died as well, and the mother died. And this had a big effect on Luang Prom. He said he gave rise to this quality we call Sangha in Buddhism, which means like you're waking up to the reality of life, is that there can be a lot of suffering in human existence. And obviously the death of his wife and son was a huge suffering, a huge blow. So he's like waking up, sobering up to the realities of life. And he said it did push him more towards the Buddhist teachings. And the next few years he put a lot of effort, spent a lot of his money on building monasteries, supporting Sangha. He built 2 monasteries in particular. So he did a lot of dana, generosity, charity. Eventually he found a second wife, and the second wife he took was someone who had very strong faith in Buddhism. That's what drew them together. But she didn't get pregnant, and while he was married again for about 5 years, he spent more and more time supporting Sangha and monks and obviously listening to their teachings. And he met one disciple of Luang Man, who was the most famous meditation master of the time, who really inspired him to want to ordain. Just seeing, his delusion or his illusion of happiness had been shattered by the death of his first wife and child. And he decided, he was already giving away a lot of his wealth to support the Sangha. He said, when he was about 37, he said, this is it, this is the time, I should really ordain, otherwise I'll be too old to put effort into my practice. And he talked to his wife, his second wife, and she was interested to become a nun. So they made an agreement, they would both ordain. And they had no children, so they were going to give away everything. So there's this beautiful story of he made this announcement in the district that he was giving everything away because he's going to become a monk. And so they said for 3 days and 3 nights, particularly the poorest people of their district were queuing up at his house. The queue was like hundreds of meters long, and he was giving away everything that he had that was worth anything, particularly food. He had lots of rice. That's often how wealth is measured in rural Thailand. He had sacks and sacks of rice, which he was giving away, other food stuff, all his agricultural implements. But they said he was very determined not to give away anything that would encourage unskillful action, so he went out into the forest and hid all his weapons and tools associated with hunting, which he did have. So he didn't give them away, he hid them, and nobody could find them. He didn't want anyone to kill on his behalf, or because he'd given them the tools to do it. So in the end, after 3 days, all that was left were the clothes on his back and his wife's back, and then the house. He had 2 houses actually in his land. He had a lot of land and 2 houses. everything else was gone. He'd given it all away to many, many people. And that story has been recounted many times over the decades. Then he was ready to ordain. The two houses, timber houses, he actually dismantled and offered to become kutis in two different monasteries, monks' dwelling places. So even the houses were used. I'm not sure what happened to the land. I think it was given to relatives. But funny thing was, when he ordained, many of his siblings, nephews and cousins ordained as well. So very similar to the Buddha. The Buddha brought many of his family members into the robes as monks and nuns, and so did Luang Prom. So he went off to become a monk, ordained in a Dhammayutta forest temple, and dedicated his life as a monk to the practice of meditation, because that's what brought him into the robes. He really wanted to meditate for the end of suffering and reach Nibbana. He didn't immediately go to live with his the teacher he revered, Luang Por Man. He lived with a disciple of Luang Por Man, Luang Por San, I think his name was. And he also travelled a bit. And he travelled mainly around northern Thailand, where a lot of the forest monks lived in those days, because there's a really good forest, and there's also in Burma and Laos. So he moved around, practicing with teachers, meditating, and also staying in different places. And he had terrible illness in his first few years as a monk. He had stomach problems, probably dysentery. I'm not sure the name of the illness, but constant diarrhea and terrible pain in the stomach. That sounds like dysentery. Something that many monks had to suffer in the old days in Thailand, because hygiene wasn't so great in the villages, and you're dependent on alms, whatever food comes your way. So couldn't choose. So often you got various kinds of stomach ailments based on the food you're eating. And so he had terrible pain, and he actually was thinking, this is a real obstacle. And he ended up in a Luang, the second major city in Laos, in a hospital, feeling sorry for himself. But then he looked at himself and he said he was feeling sorry for himself with all this pain and suffering of the digestive illness he had. And he reached a point where he said, I'm fed up being sorry for myself and suffering with this illness. I'm going to stop seeking treatment for it, worrying about it. I'm just going to use Dhamma practice for it. Which is something similar to Ajahn Chah and other teachers. He just reached a point, he said, it's enough, I'm not going to bother about it anymore, I'm just going to carry on with my practice and basically ignore it, but rely on the good karma of the Dhamma. I'm practicing the sila, the meditation, to deal with the illness. And he said that was, again, like a turning point in his practice, and from then on his illness actually improved and left him, but without medication. He just did it through practice. And he was known in his early years as one who just put all his time and energy into meditation, without any kind of concern for personal comfort. He spent most of his day doing walking meditation, and he'd sit up at night meditating. And in the Vasa, the first few years, he would not lie down at all. He would only, he said, take up the practice of 3 postures: sitting, standing, walking, but not lying down. And when the time was ripe, he went to look for Luang Por Man. He realized he hadn't yet progressed as far as he wanted in his meditation. He thought, I need to live with my teacher, not just respect him from afar. So he asked permission to go and stay and live with Luang Por Man, who in those days lived in Chiang Mai, up northern Thailand. And when he arrived at Luang Por Man's monastery, before then he'd only met the disciples of Ajahn Man. And in those days there's no internet, TV, pictures, whatever. So he'd only heard of the reputation and the words of Luang Por Man secondhand. He knew he was a good teacher, but he hadn't met him in person. So when he first went to see Luang Por Man was actually quite a small slight figure, thin, short, physically maybe not so impressive, you might say. And Luang Prom thought, when he first saw Luang Por Man, he said, how can this skinny little man be such a revered meditation master with so many disciples? He just doesn't look the part. How can it be? He had this doubt in his mind. And the next day, I think, he went to actually pay respects to Luang Por Man, and Luang Por Man straight away said, you shouldn't jump to conclusions. This is about people just on their external appearance. The Dhamma is something that grows in the heart, and the physical body is one thing, the Dhamma of the pure heart is another. Don't become heedless, just believing your opinions based on what you see with your eyes, which shocked Luang Por Prom, because he realized straight away that Luang Por Man knew exactly what he had been thinking. So that really woke him up, and he started to respect Luang Por Man as his teacher even more from that point on, and basically committed himself to following Luang Por Man, and whatever you say, I'll do it, kind of thing. And Luang Por Man's first teachings for him were maybe just relax a little bit. Luang Por Man said, you're overdoing it, you're trying too hard with your effort. Going without sleep, sitting up all night, walking all day. He said, I appreciate all the effort you're putting in, but you're doing too much. Your mind is not settling down enough because you're trying too hard physically. Your exertion is too great, and it's actually an obstacle. So he had to teach Luang Por Prom to back off a bit in his effort, maybe to rest a bit more, put more effort into developing refined states of mindfulness and samadhi before becoming too ascetic and extreme in not sleeping and so on. And Luang Por Man talked about other monks who had gone too far in their practice, to the point where they walk bindabata in the morning to collect food, and they're falling asleep as they walk. Or other monks actually becoming psychotic or mentally ill because of their exertions, just trying too hard. So that was a warning from Luang Por Man to Luang Por Prom, because he could see Luang Por Prom was a really gung-ho monk, but not yet wise enough or peaceful enough to really benefit from all this physical exertion he was putting forward. So he told him to ease off a little bit, which he did, and he found he did start to develop deeper samadhi and more refined states of mind and insight. So he appreciated that teaching from Luang Por Man. And Luang Por Man grew to really respect his student Luang Por Prom over the next few years, and so much so he held him up as a kind of an example monk. Luang Por Prom was very quiet. He didn't talk a lot. He talked what was necessary, but he didn't talk a lot. He didn't give public talks. He just chatted to the other monks and occasionally to lay people, but he was quite a silent monk, put a lot of effort into his meditation, living very simply and very not seeking out comfort. He was known for one who could be very ascetic. He could put up with terrible food, terrible climate, terrible places, and very limited support. He had great endurance. And Luang Por Man praised him many times to the other monks, saying, this is how you should practice. You should be content with little, easy to look after, putting forth effort into developing sila, samadhi, panya, and particularly your meditation. And he would praise Luang Por Prom to the other monks. And he'd ask him things. He'd say, well, how's your practice going? And Luang Por Prom would say, well, I'm beyond doubt about the body, which is a very common way meditation monks would answer their teacher, meaning they have no more doubts that the body is not self. It's a collection of elements, the 32 parts, the 4 elements. It's unattractive. It's not a basis for desire and attachment. It's something to be let go of. So you say, I have no more doubts about the body, which is like saying, I've had that level of insight. So he went off to practiced. After a few years with Luang Por Man, he went off to practice more on his own, moving around again, particularly in Burma, sometimes Laos. And there was one occasion I sort of came up remembering Luang Por Prom because we had an earthquake recently. He said one time he was in the forest and he found this stone Buddha which had been destroyed and was in a number of pieces on the floor. It was probably an old hermitage or small deserted monastery, and he started to piece it together again out of respect. He felt this is terrible that a Buddha statue has been damaged and just left here unattended. I want to put it back together. And he started putting back together, and he said at that moment there was an earthquake. And northern Burma, northern Thailand do occasionally have earthquakes. So this earthquake happened as he was piecing the Buddha together. He said it was so violent he had to hold on to the pillar of the meditation hall in this abandoned monastery. And a similar sort of story happened a bit later. He went back into Thailand and was staying in a place called Mea Rim, just north of Chiang Mai, which today is, there's less forests there, but there's a lot of resorts and things. But anyway, it was very popular in those days with forest monks. And there's a time he was with Luang Por Khao, another very famous meditation disciple of Luang Por Man. And Luang Por Khao had also found a damaged Buddha statue. This one was a metal one, a bronze one, but it had gold in it, or originally it had gold in it, and the gold had been stolen. So the flame on top of the Buddha's head often is made out of solid gold, and it's attractive to thieves. So it had been stolen, and the arms had been stolen by thieves hoping to make some money out of the gold or the metal, the value of the metal. So Luang Por Khao had retrieved it from an abandoned monastery, brought it to some lay people near Chiang Mai to look after, and he couldn't find anyone to restore it. His wish was to remake this Buddha, and he was telling Luang Por Prom his problem, that he couldn't find a craftsman to restore this beautiful old Buddha statue. So he asked Luang Por Prom, do you think you could do it? And Luang Por Prom said, yep, I can do it. So he volunteered to actually do the work as the craftsman to restore the Buddha statue for Luang Por Khao, and then it was installed in a temple. And Luang Por Prom said at that time, I was doing this work on the Buddha, I had this vision that Luang Por Khao had actually been the one who made the Buddha. In a previous life, he'd made this Buddha. He was the one making the fire, because when you make bronze Buddhas, you build a really hot fire, boil up the bronze, and then pour it into a mold. And he'd been the one making the fire. And he told Luang Por Khao. Luang Por Khao said, yeah, I had a similar vision. And from that time on, everyone knew that Luang Por Prom could not only read minds, he could also remember past lives. So he was known as a monk with very great skills with samadhi. And he'd use that to teach monks, teach lay people, sometimes knowing what they were thinking and their states of mind and their karma from the past. Sometimes he'd use that to teach them to understand themselves better. So he went through much of his life as a monk, travelling in the forests, until later on he went back to northeast Thailand following Luang Por Man and stayed near Luang Por Man until Luang Por Man passed away, and then he stayed on in northeast Thailand until he died himself. And one time he was with Luang Por Khao, and he asked Luang Por Khao, where should I go when Luang Por Man dies? If I remember correctly. And Luang Por Khao answered him as somebody who maybe has reached Nibbana would answer, and said, well, there's nowhere to go. There's no place to be. There's nowhere in front or behind, up or down, to the north, to the south, to the east, to the west. There's no abiding place, is there? And just answered him like that. He's like describing an arahant has no abiding place. There's no place to be, nowhere to go, and you're not reborn anywhere. Your mind has gone beyond that. Your mind doesn't alight on anything as a place to be. There's no material place or no realm ever, anywhere for an arahant. So I think that's all I can remember about Luang Prom at the moment, but anyway, considered to be an enlightened monk and inspiring life both as a lay practitioner and then as a monk, one of the older generation. There's another question here. How can I improve my ability to concentrate when my mind is when my mind is distracted by computers and everything that's available on them? The internet is like the modern jungle, isn't it? In the old days, monks go into the jungle, and there's tigers and snakes and malaria and disease and loneliness and ghosts and all kinds of dangers. Now it's all on the internet, isn't it? The danger of your mind just leaving your place of mindfulness and the present moment, getting lost, seeking distraction, going out of yourself into the world of internet. So I think this question has come from a student, so somebody who's studying, whose studies are being interrupted by other things. Basically, the mind is finding it hard to focus on the studies in hand, keeps playing the games, looking at those other websites, whatever it is. That's the attraction of the sensual world. We allow our mind to go out through the eyes, the ears, tongue, smell, touch, and then the imagination. But the computer and the internet is like a realm where you can seek out all of that stuff and get away from your own feelings of discomfort, boredom, restlessness, agitation, the dukkha of life, physical dukkha. When you absorb into a computer screen and whatever it is you're involved with, looking at, the entertainment, the stimulation, you forget any pain in the body, and mentally you don't have to think of anything that you don't like or be with anything you don't like. You can just surf away or look away, whatever it may be, whether it's video games, movies, porn, whatever you like. You've got that opportunity now. Unfortunately, the internet has opened that up. So if you've got to work from home, concentrate on your work, or you're studying from home, that's the challenge, is how to concentrate on what you've got to do. So one thing is you have to have a conversation with yourself. If you come to the point where you've asked this question, then you've got to sit down and have a conversation with yourself and establish your goals. I want to complete my studies, or do this job of work. You've got to see the short-term goals, so there's certain assignments, tasks you've got to do online, say. And then the long-term goal, you want to complete your study, get your degree or your certificate so that you can get a job, get the long-term goals established, and then the short-term goals so that you can focus on them. Maybe you have to plan your day, plan your time. You say, okay, there'll be this time where I study and I don't get into anything else, and you don't allow yourself to go into anything else. And you make that agreement with yourself, and maybe even write it down, time for study or work. And then you allow yourself time for recreation at an appropriate time for an appropriate length of time. And you have to work it out for yourself and then try and stick to the plan you've made and stick to these short-term goals you set up for yourself. And practice. It's about discipline, effort, practice, and not losing sight of your short-term and long-term goal. whoever you are, whatever you're doing in life, you have to learn how to let go of desires, put it off, postpone it, or even completely let it go. So one good way to do this is come into a monastery for a while, without a computer or mobile phone, and just see what it's like. See if you can learn to be quiet without all those things, and then you have a new perspective on them. You can see that they're not that essential to your happiness. It's not saying that you can't play video games or watch movies or whatever it is you do, but also learning to do without these things. This is what we call nekama barami, and it's not just for monks or nuns, it's also for lay people to learn the discipline of letting go of sense pleasures and entertainment, recreation and things. There's a time and place, and you have to start learning how to do that. And discipline. So, when you notice you're losing your discipline, you have to stop and remind yourself, why do you need your discipline? You're training the mind. And one thing is, the training you do, say you are studying and you're trying to study using a computer, that effort you put in to do the study, complete the tasks, learn the information, whatever it is you're doing, you're training your mind, and that ability to train your mind to be patient, complete things that you want to complete without going to the distractions, that's a skill that you can then apply in many other aspects of your life in the future, to do with work, study, hobbies even, or whatever. And of course, meditation and learning what the Buddha taught as well. It's a skill, a life skill that is so valuable for you, learning how to control your mind, set aside less important things, not forever, you can still find time to have recreation time, but in a balanced and managed way. But learning to be able to do that, to set it aside, so you're not a slave. So every time you have a desire, you have to press the button, go and look, go and do this, go and do that. Have enough self-control, enough self-awareness, enough mindfulness, enough understanding of what you're doing so that you can train yourself. And then you can apply that to many other things. So meditation can help. Why is meditation hard? Because you sit down and you don't have a computer and you don't have all these other things, and you just have to sit there with your body and your mind and learn to be more mindful and patient with yourself and learn more about yourself. And that's an invaluable life skill. So sometimes we have to take the initiative, go somewhere without your computer, turn it off or physically separate from it. Go out into the forest, go for walks in the countryside without your phone, without your computer. You make the effort to teach yourself you can do without anything you're particularly addicted to. Once you've seen that problem, then you make effort to do without it. So you're teaching yourself. It's not hard and not easy, but it's something that you'll find invaluable as time goes on, because it'll give you a better perspective on life, and you'll see a lot of things that we get addicted to or caught up in are just trivial. They're not that important, so it's quite all right to let them go, and you may find a deeper sense of contentment, satisfaction and happiness is available to us. It's just we have to work towards it and discipline ourselves to get to the point where we can appreciate some of the deeper kinds of happiness that the mind can have. So don't give up, but just keep training yourself and developing that effort, discipline and wisdom around using things like computer. Often people say, they blame the computer or the internet, but these things are actually neutral. It's us, how well we use technology. So technology can be used for great good and benefit, or it can be used for harm. We can hurt each other, kill each other, physically hurt each other, mentally hurt each other. As we know, technology can go in two directions. The important thing is who's using it and the mind behind the one using it. Last question. The Tathagata was to have said, a family must possess 9 distinctive marks to be entitled to the privilege of entertaining monks. What are these 9 distinctive marks, and how can they be cultivated and maintained in the long term for the happiness of all, I think. I'm not wearing glasses. So, I believe this is from the Dhammapada, isn't it? From the story when there was the king Pasenadi, who became of Kosala. He became a disciple of the Buddha, but in the beginning he was very inexperienced with the Buddha, monks. Like many of us, if we aren't born into a Buddhist family or Buddhist culture, maybe when we're new to it, we don't know what to do. People come to a monastery and say, I don't know what to do. They meet monks, I don't know what to do, I might do something wrong. Many people are like this, and I think King Pasenadi was the same. And he had his palace in the center of Savatthi, I guess, or where. Anyway, he was seeing the leading disciples of the Buddha, the lay disciples, inviting monks regularly to their houses. So he'd see 500 monks wandering through the town. He said, where are they going? He'd ask his staff, his assistants, where are they going? And they say, they're going to Anathapindika's house for dana. And another 500 monks going over there to Visakha's house, and another 500 monks to someone else's house. He'd see all these large groups of monks going to people's houses, and he thought, that looks impressive. He was getting his interest up. He wanted to make some merit. I guess there may be a little bit of self involved, that pride, I can invite monks, if they can do it, I can do it. And he's a king, so he's got to be able to do anything that anyone else can do in his kingdom. So he had this idea, I've got to start inviting monks. So he invited the Buddha for 7 days to come and receive food with 500 monks, which all went off well. And then he just wanted from then on to invite the Buddha every day. That would certainly boost his reputation as king, and he was probably getting a lot of faith as well. But the Buddha said, I can't. Buddha is a Buddha. A Buddha brings up faith in the hearts of so many people. A Buddha can't just serve or be close to one person. The Buddha has to be open to many people to make merit, make offerings, listen to the Dhamma. So I can't just permanently be coming to your palace for food. So I'm afraid I can't accept this invite to come all the time. So Pasenadi said, can you send someone then? So the Buddha said, yes, I'll send Ananda with 500 monks. And Ananda, very good monk, so not a bad deal for the king. But Ananda came, but the king kind of slightly lost interest. I guess it wasn't the Buddha, and he became distracted. And also he's new to Buddhism. And because he's a king, no one in the palace would move. If the king wasn't moving or doing something, then they wouldn't move and do it for him. So Ananda and the monks came along, and the Buddha and the king, Pasenadi, forgot about them. Basically, he was doing other things. So the monks are kind of sitting there uncomfortable. There's no seats put out, no place prepared. It was all like, do they want us here? Is this really a dana invitation or not? The monks started to doubt, and so they started to drift away. So day after day, for a couple of days, the monks all came and then they just drifted away. They didn't trust or have confidence that Pasenadi really wanted them there. But Ananda, who's very loyal to the Buddha, loyal to the teachings of the Buddha, I think he felt out of his sort of sense of leadership, and it's the king, I better sit here. So he stuck his guns and he stayed. But all the other monks left, feeling that they lost confidence in the king, feeling he wasn't sincere in his invitation for for them to come and eat. And if there's no place laid out as a monk, where do I sit? You go in, you don't feel comfortable, so you leave. That's how monks practice. So the monks all disappeared, the food didn't get eaten, and when the king finally realized what was happening, he asked someone, he said, how come all the food is not getting eaten? And they said, well, the monks all left. Only Ananda stayed. Only one monk stayed. So the king went off to the Buddha in a bit of a huff. I'm a king. The monks should do what I want. They should be here for me when they're not. And he thought the Buddha would criticize the monks for leaving, not waiting to receive alms from the king. But the Buddha didn't. He said, no, that's correct. The monks didn't have confidence in you. So the Buddha is teaching a king, you're not practicing properly, basically. You're too inexperienced and you're not trying hard enough in your dana, really. Too distracted, not giving it the importance that it should have. And so the monks aren't wrong for doing this. And this led to this teaching the Buddha gave about there are the 9 qualities or characteristics people have who will arouse confidence in the monks to come and receive alms. And then there's the 9 characteristics, qualities that don't arouse confidence in the monks, and they won't come or they'll leave because they don't feel comfortable. So these are, a monk goes to a household, whether it's a king or anyone else, families, anywhere, they go, but the people don't really welcome them into the home. They're not there, maybe. They just don't welcome them. And the people don't go through the formalities of respect. Like, in our tradition, you go to someone's home, they might sit you down, so they get you a seat. They don't get you a seat. They would bow, maybe do some formal acts of respect. They don't do that. And then if they're a person, they have a lot of wealth, but they hide their wealth. They don't want the monks to see it. It's another quality that doesn't inspire confidence. And then they have a lot of food, but they only bring out a little bit of food. And they have very good quality food at home, but they bring out the worst food for the monks. And when they offer food, they don't show respect. Maybe they get other people to offer it, or if they offer it, they kind of do it in a casual way, kind of putting it down, maybe spilling it as they put it down or something, or just shoving it in front of the monk. No love, no respect. And then they sit a long way away because they don't want to have to hear any Dhamma teaching. So they sit a long way away, they don't open up for Dhamma teaching, and if the monk is teaching, they don't show respect, they don't listen, they're not interested, maybe even angry, don't want to hear it, why is he talking too much? So there's these 9 qualities that don't inspire confidence in the Sangha, and so monks don't feel obliged to go to that person's house or receive their invitation, and the Buddha said that's correct. Monks have a lot of rules about teaching. We can't preach and convert people. If we haven't been invited to teach, we can't just start teaching anybody. We have to be invited. And when we teach, they have to show respect. So even a king has to lower his umbrella, which in the old days was a sign of status. Have to lower your umbrella, if you've got a sword or a gun, take your weapon off, take your shoes off. You show respect, you sit down, you don't stand towering over the one giving a Dhamma talk. There's a lot of rules we have to follow. If the lay people are not showing respect in the proper way, then we probably should just stay quiet or leave. This is to protect the Dhamma and protect the Sangha, as in the institution of the Sangha, the collective reputation of the Sangha. Because if you're going around teaching people who are not respectful, then the Dhamma is not going to give much benefit to them, and people just get in the habit of not respecting the teachings. So there's no value given to them. I remember many years ago, the King and Queen of Thailand, Rama the Ninth, went to see Luang Mahabua. Once in a while they would go and see him. And they went in, and when the King and Queen of Thailand or anywhere, they go somewhere, there's always protocol. There's lots of soldiers and attendants, and things are prepared, and the carpet is put out, and it's all done nicely. And Luang Mahabua was sitting there eating bituna, as he would, and all the reception had been set up and palaver, and then the king and the queen came in. But on this occasion, they didn't take their shoes off, and they sat there, bowed, and Luang Mahabua didn't talk to them. And for a long time, they're kind of waiting for him to talk, and he didn't. And they're kind of looking at each other and looking at the army officer, and, something's wrong. And so they kind of backed off a bit and asked one of the attendants, what's going on? What's going on? Why isn't he talking to us? And then someone said, maybe it's because you didn't take your shoes off. King and queen normally don't have to take their shoes off. They can go anywhere, but they didn't. But with Luang Mahabua, the monk's rules is that you're not supposed to teach people who've got their shoes on. In the West here, sometimes we do relax that a little bit, maybe because it's cold and wet weather, or people, they just really don't understand that one. It's considered a minor rule, but nevertheless, on that occasion, Luang Mahabua wouldn't speak because they had their shoes on. So they took their shoes off, they went back up to him, bowed, and he started talking to them. So there is quite a bit of protocol, rules around respect for monks and the right occasion, the right attitude. So this is why the Buddha said, the 9 qualities you have to bring out, show respect. You've got to welcome the monks, because monks are beggars, and if they don't feel welcome, they'll feel like they shouldn't be there. That's just naturally how you feel. And it does happen occasionally. You go to someone's house and they're not welcoming. It's like, oh, they don't really want me here. So straight away you feel like you should leave. And it's just a natural human reaction, because you're a beggar and you don't want to impose on someone who doesn't want you, doesn't like you. Fine, off you go. And usually it might be on arms round. So like, say in the West here, in Australia, sometimes monks go and stand in the wrong place, and maybe outside a shop. Like in Birdwood in South Australia, the monks one time were standing outside a cafe, and one of the staff came out and said, I'm really sorry, but it's our policy. We can't have people begging in front of the cafe. Please move on. So of course they moved on. They don't want to be disturbing people who don't want them there. And then another shop owner heard about this and went in and blasted the cafe and said, how could you be so rude and disrespectful to monks? So after that they were allowed to stand there. So sometimes things adjust themselves. But if a monk is not respected, you don't want to bother people, you move on. But if you're shown respect, if they put a seat out for you, so if you go to someone's house, you have to show them where to sit. That's the standard procedure. You see in some traditions like Sri Lanka, put on the white cloth. Thailand, you might put out a square mat, like the kind of mats we sit on. This, you invite the monk to sit. This is one of the qualities that entitle you or are correct and bring confidence to the Sangha when they go to your house. You show you're interested and you're trying to show your respect. You're giving them the sense of welcoming them into your house. You might bow or put your hands in Anjali. And then, of course, generally Buddhists will always give the best of what they've got. They've got food, and always put effort into making nice food. It's not that the monks need that or want that. It's more for the lay people. It's making that effort. You say, oh, monks have come to my house. This is a great occasion. I want to give them the best. That's normally the way people respond. But monks would never complain if you don't give them the best. Fine, doesn't matter. But the Buddha is just pointing out, if you're consciously hiding your wealth, all the good stuff is hidden away in the cupboard, or if you've got a lot but you just bring out a tiny bit of food, or you bring out the worst food, which occasionally happens, then that's a sign of your stinginess. It's the opposite of Luang Prom, who we were talking about earlier. Like they say, when he gave away everything before he became a monk and his wife became a nun, they gave away everything. They said they abandoned macharya in that moment. And macharya means your stinginess, your possessiveness. This is why Buddhists practice generosity. You're chipping away at your possessiveness, your desire to keep hold of stuff, identify and attach to your wealth. So sometimes you see people are in a kind of quandary. Do I give the monks this or keep it for myself or my family? The Buddha is encouraging to give, look after the monks, treat them well if you want them to come to your house and have confidence that you really want them there. That's the best way to do it. So not to hide things, not to give the worst. And when you give, to give with respect. Not to throw it down in front of them, which has happened before. Throw the soup down and the soup spills everywhere or whatever, or with the mood. Occasionally people give in to their moods, don't they? And they're a little bit irritated, maybe for some other reason, but it comes out with the monks. Sometimes the monks are doormats for people's moods. Not often, but it does happen. The only time I've kind of been turned away from a house once because the guy thought the monks were going to steal his land because his land bordered a monastery, and he was not happy. So when he saw monks come, he stormed off. So we just moved on. It didn't bother him. Another time, somebody had a funeral, and no, they didn't have a funeral. Sorry, a lady saw us come into the house, in front of the house. There's 4 of us, and 4 monks in Thailand means a funeral. You usually send 4 monks to a funeral, so it's kind of in people's mind that if you see 4 monks, it's kind of bad luck, means it's a funeral, someone's going to die. People get superstitious like that. So 4 of us walked into the house, and the lady of the house said, "No, I'm not accepting 4, bad luck, I only want 3. So one monk kind of quietly shuffled away, embarrassed. Okay, you go back to the monastery. So occasionally that happens, something like that. But the Buddha has just encouraged, if you want to develop your faith and also the confidence of the monks to teach you and help you, well, look after them respectfully, be kind to them. And of course, when it's time for Dhamma, don't sit there and say, "Oh, no Dhamma needed here, I don't need to listen." And people do that, don't they? Even people who've been Buddhists a long time. Ajahn Chah used to joke about this. He used to say, people come and they just want a little Dhamma talk, just a little Dhamma talk. Because they get, as soon as you start talking Dhamma, they start to feel uncomfortable. Maybe you point out some aspects of life that reminds them of their own faults or where they've gone wrong, or just the pain of sitting on the floor listening to a Dhamma talk maybe, and they're shuffling around. So they say, "Can you just give us a little Dhamma talk?" People with good faith, they want a long Dhamma talk to bring up inspiration and make them feel good. And if you receive a Dhamma talk from someone like Ajahn Chah, you delight in the Dhamma and you feel supercharged for the rest of the day, maybe even the rest of the week. But some people don't want a Dhamma talk, so they try and close it down, keep it short, keep it quiet, keep it brief. So listen to the Dhamma with respect. Don't talk over the Dhamma teaching. That's a common one. It's not so much through lack of respect, it's more through lack of mindfulness. The monk gives a talk, but everyone's talking over it, so no one can hear anyway. Ideally, you invite monks to your house, you want to listen to them and get some good teaching to help you and your family, get some inspiration, get a blessing. So if you're all talking over the top of the monk, it's not the best. The monk won't complain again usually, but for you it's not the best. So try to listen respectfully, and you benefit more from the experience. So this teaching is, it's a quoted tradition, to how to receive monks, respect monks, and the Buddha said it will give the monks confidence so that they help you and teach you and look after you more, and it will boost your own faith and confidence as well. Whereas the opposite takes away your confidence, and faith takes away the confidence of the monks. So it is something to think about, how you relate to monks. And the Buddha said, somebody who has confidence in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, they want to practice, they want to learn, they'll sit close to the monks. In a sense, they're showing that they really respect the monks, the teachings, they want to learn, they want to practice. So it's a bit like, it's a bit like when I used to play in a rock band, the people way down the back, you'd say, oh, they're the ones who are insincere, the ones up the front. So it's the same with Buddhism, isn't it? With teachings. The ones who sit at the back, so they don't have to be seen, don't have to hear anything. Maybe that's a sign they're not that interested. Sit up the front, sit close to the monks, then you'll get more from the experience. That's how the Buddha described it. So, a few teachings on receiving Sangha into your house, something to reflect on. Anyway, that's the end of the Q&A tonight, so we wish you all well.